So hi, it's Brendan again, and I'm going to talk about the U.S. system of government and how that works. And I'm not going to do so much of the problems, but I'm going to do a basic video and especially things that aren't really talked about in civics class, which is a lot of it. So let's start with what people call the United States. I have my cat here. Oh, I have one of my cats here. Whoop. Hi, everybody. Meet Sooty. Sooty, say hi. Hi. Anyways, so the United States is people call it a democratic republic or representative democracy. But that's kind of like, okay, yeah, so what? Ducks are ducks, or a chicken's a chicken, or a tomato is a potato, or a tomato is a tomato. What? Yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, so because of the countries of the world, all those in red claim they're republics, but they're democratic republics, but they're not. North Korea goes as far as to say it's the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, even though it's a totalitarian dictatorship that acts like an absolute monarchy, which is completely like the exact opposite. But methinks North Korea protests too much. However, so in all the countries in blue are democratic republics, in all, like the United States, for example, or France, or Germany, or Finland, or Brazil, or Argentina, or Chile, or Mexico, or Colombia, or South Africa, or Mongolia, or South Korea, or Indonesia, or India, or you get the idea, or Italy, or Ireland, or Iceland, you get the idea. So it's kind of and all the countries in orange are sort of not democratic republics, but they claim to be republics. So it's kind of like Ukraine or Turkey, for example, or Pakistan. So it's kind of a misnomer to say, oh, it's a democratic republic. Well, yeah, but what do you mean? In the countries in dark green, like Canada or UK or Spain or Norway or Sweden or Denmark or the Netherlands or in Belgium or Australia or New Zealand. I think I have a misnomer there because it is the Papua New Guinea monarch. Is it? I don't know. Thailand or Japan. All of these are not really. They're monarchies, but they're constitutional monarchies. So they act like republics. So the idea to say, oh yeah, we are a we are a democratic republic is sort of like, yeah, and so because the only countries that aren't democratic republics are like Cambodia, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Jordan, Morocco, and these countries over here, which are in a traditional or transitional period, or at least the ones that claim the title. They're on pretty much everybody, or Switzerland, which is a direct democracy, the world's only direct democracy, by the way. And of course, China and Russia, and Iran, and Venezuela. None of these are actually democratic in any sense of the word. They're really just totalitarian or authoritarian states, and they're really not democratic in any sense of the word. Same with North Korea, which is a totalitarian state. It's even worse. It's only one of two totalitarian states in the world, and those are North Korea and Eritrea. But anyways, enough of that. And I would have to go through the differences between authoritarianism and totalitarianism, which, let's put it this way. China doesn't go to the extent, like, China's authoritarian. It doesn't really go to the extent, they have the death penalty everywhere. Trials are sham. sham. They're really not fair. Their government is very quick to react on things. Is dictatorship into it. There's no real freedom of anything. Freedom of the press non-existent. They put our they're they are torturing and imprisoning people, Uyghurs, a Muslim minority in China, for being Uyghurs. No freedom of religion, no freedom of speech, etc. But they mostly just care about government. Now, North Korea goes to the extent of running your life that they wake you up in the morning with a special revolutionary song. That's the extent of totalitarianism. Nazi Germany was a totalitarian state, not a authoritarian state, because it encompassed any part of your life. You didn't have to criticize the government to get sent. No, they just had to do something you didn't like. Like if you go to North Korea, they'll search your packaging for Bibles because you can't take a Bible into North Korea because it's officially atheist. It's ridiculous. Totalitarian goes to every aspect of life, put it that way. Okay, so enough of that one. Okay, so let's go. Oops. And so this is the U.S. system of government. So to explain it in simple terms, so there's three branches. This is the legislative branch, consisting of the House of Representatives and the Senate. This is the executive branch, consisting of the president and cabinet. This is a cabinet as an agent, as a form of system of body and government, an organ of government. They don't normally talk about. Yes, organ. Do not know why they call them organs. It's an organ. It's like you can. It's not like it's. There's no heart. It's Congress. It's the House, Senate, cabinet, the presidency. Not the heart, brain, and intestines and stomach, but it's an organ for some reason. Don't ask me why. And then there's this Supreme Court, which is the judicial. Actually, there's more than the judicial, but we're not going to go into that. So in the U.S. presidential system, both Congress, both the House and the Senate, House of Representatives and the Senate, and the presidency are elected directly. They are elected by the people, everybody over the age of 18 and older, pretty much all U.S. citizens over the age of 18 and older, and they're elected to these bodies. The House of Representatives, let's go through Congress first. Congress is the branch that people like. They say it's first in the Constitution because it's supposed to be the supreme. The founding fathers apparently forgot about that when they put it in the Constitution because it doesn't work that way. Now, however, Congress is not the people tend to take the presidency and says it has more power than it actually the president does. Biden doesn't have as much power, or Trump didn't have as much power, especially him, as people claim he does, or as Trump claimed he did. So the House of Representatives is made up of 435 members. Each of them is elected by first past the post, which the selection systems like this in legislature are actually extremely important. They're one of the reasons why we see so much partisanship today, and why it's so hard to get members to be changed in Congress, because we use first past the post, among a bunch of other problems that occur from it. Partisanship, that's probably one of the biggest ones. Gerrymandering, and those others. What was another one? They really don't have proportional. I'm not really represented because my representative doesn't align with my political views. So, representative from my area is John Joyce. Anyways, because I live in Pennsylvania and I forget the district number. I really don't remember. But anyways, so each member in U.S. House of Representatives is or each state is given a certain number of representatives based on the population. And every 10 years that changes through the U.S. Census. Now, of the 435, each 435 members of Congress has a district, which is a geographical shape on a map, and they're given one representative. that differs from how, and that person is represented by a majority vote of the district. That differs from different systems of representation. There's proportional representation for one, for people of the different districts or across the country, and then the people of the district vote like for the percentage of people, the number of members for that district or the entire country that they want to be a certain party, and then they elect people to those seats based on list ranking candidates. Or there's a similar system, single transferable vote, which is I'm not going to go into. Or there's other systems as well. Mixed member proportional representation, which is one of my favorites, which is really complicated, and I'm not going to go into it. There are different other systems. Yeah, and that system has been created by law. There's 435 members as well, and they're led by the Speaker of the House, which is currently Nancy Pelosi. And yeah, and they have a minority and majority members that sort of lead the parties. In the U.S., the Speaker of the House is always the leader of the majority party, which is kind of confusing. That's given that in Britain, it's a nonpartisan representative. You would think that the person that would be leading the House would be a nonpartisan representative who would have, because they control the floor, they control who speaks, they control all this and that. And you would think they would give equality to it. Now, they technically don't even have to debate things, and many times they don't. Many times it's the party that's governing that makes up the stuff. And that was not just Pelosi that does that. That's also the Republicans that they get in the power as well. They do that as well. That's one problem with how our government, they don't use general order. The system that you're used to make laws, which is this, is not how they make laws anymore, which is unfortunate. I mean, it has to go through the House and the Senate and be signed by the president, which I'm going to get into. So, and then the Senate is made up of 2 members per state, 100 members in total, because there's 50 states. Oh, yeah, I forgot. The U.S. is really what is called a federal presidential republic. It is federal because it consists of 50 constituent states, which are also sovereign. Given the United States is sovereign. Sovereignty means they have authority where the authority derives. They derive authority from the people too. In other government systems that you may see, like, okay, France, it's unitary, meaning all of France elects the government of France, and there is only the government of France and the local governments. There is no providential government. Or you may see systems like Britain, which are unitary but devolve their government. So all the sovereignty comes from the UK government, which devolves it to Scottish government, Wales government, or itself, the English government, or London's government, or the Northern Ireland government. Or you may see other federal systems like India or Germany, but that's another time. Again, to go more into that for another time. It's presidential because it elects president separately through a popular election. A lot of time, when we see the British system, the prime minister is the executive, who is elected by the lower house, which would be the House of Commons, which in their system is the lower house by a majority vote. It has to keep a majority of that part. We don't have, that's part of vote of confidence. If they lose it, or they lose a budget, then they get thrown out of office and then automatic new elections come into play, or unless they can agree to a new government, in which case they get swept out of office and government that hopefully can run the country gets newly elected, put in place, if everything goes to plan. However, our system doesn't have that, and that causes some deadlocks. Also, because the president is also has the same sovereignty amount as the legislature, which makes it difficult. The Senate is made up of 2 members per state, and they have this thing called the filibuster, which makes it that you would think they would rule by a majority vote. They only do for Supreme Court justices, and I forget what else, but executive appointments, because it doesn't matter when we put people in the Supreme Court who rule for life. It only matters when we put in the law. Don't ask me why. It was a mistake way back then. That's another video for another time. So the Senate is led by the vice president technically, but the vice president is never there because the vice president gets jobs given. The vice president currently Kamala Harris, to this woman, first African-American, first woman vice president. So first non-white male president, or vice president, excuse me. So anyways, so the vice president is the president of the Senate, which makes it very confusing, but yeah. The president, so under them is the president pro tempore of the Senate, which usually leads the Senate in their absence. And by usually, I mean almost never. Usually it's a junior member of the, just so they can get to know the very confusing and confuddling Senate rules that make absolutely no sense. And so yeah. The Senate has more powers than the House. The Senate or the House can impeach the president. The House also can, in our system, the House has more, the lower house, the House of Representatives, has less power than the Senate, but has mostly equal. So the House of Representatives can impeach the president, which is tried by the Senate when they're presided over by Chief Justice. Fun fact: the president, or fun fact, other members of the executive branch and the courts can be also impeached, and that's how they usually are. Impeachment is a way to remove them. They have to be impeached by a majority of the House of Representatives and then convicted by a supermajority, 2/3 of the Senate, which is a good many. And fun fact as well, the Chief Justice presides over the Supreme Court or over the Senate when they're hearing trial for the president. However, there is nobody, the vice president, unfortunately, due to an accidental error by the founding fathers. I mean, I don't think the founding fathers are bad guys. I don't. I disagree with this idea that, oh, let's hate on the founding fathers because they like, yeah, that's yeah, I agree that we're terrible people for that. But at the same time, you have to remember them from their own period of time, and that was sort of normal. And that's a disgusting thing. And we should also remember that the founding fathers are not gods, and we shouldn't look up their work and say, oh. That's very annoying when people do that, but we should rue them for the historical ways that they are, instead of viewing them as completely terrible people or as infallible godlike people. We should view them as human beings. Well, back to this. So the Senate has the power to, for one, they have to confirm executive appointments. For one, example, appointments to cabinet, appointments to the Supreme Court. They also have to confirm treaties by a 2/3 vote that the president may sign with other nations, which they do by ratifying them. Yeah. So we're going to go into now. Also, the vice president does not have power, like people were claiming with January 6th, to overrule the Electoral College unilaterally. They don't have that power. It says that nowhere in the Constitution. I don't know where anybody got that idea. No, you're grasping at straws. That's not how it works. I mean, the House could technically, but that's be unprecedented, and they would have to do that. They would have to find violations, which no. Okay, back to this. Okay, back to this. So the president is elected by Electoral College. Or okay, let me say this. So things in the US have to be approved by both the House and the Senate. Back to legislation, I guess. And then signed into law by the president. The president can veto laws or legislation through just by signing veto. Another thing they can do is sign a signing statement, just as completely controversial, saying that how they'll be enforced. Another thing they can do is pocket veto it, which means they'll say this. They'll just put it sort of just say, I forgot about that law, and if Congress decides to begin recess, they will get signed into law without the president's signature. Or if the Congress adjourns, says president also can go and doesn't become law. Okay. So yeah, and also any member of Congress can propose the legislation, and it will go through committee. Committee will decide, okay, should we send this legislation back and forth, and they'll write up a bill that will get debated, it will get voted on, possibly. I say that possibly is a very low chance of doing it. Probably a 2% chance if it's proposed by a regular member of Congress and the vice president go, here, to a representative, please introduce this. It will actually get introduced. It has to be seconded. It has to go through votes. It has to go through a markup. It has to go through a bunch of other things. Half the time it does, and usually it does not get through. Usually it doesn't even get picked up. The things that get picked up are usually things that are backed by the president. So that's important because the president sets the policy that gets enacted later, usually, or leadership does, in the House and Senate. Party leadership does. So it gets from the House, Senate, and it gets thrown around back and forth like a hot potato. Either that, or they make their own bills. The House makes its own bill, the Senate makes its own bill, and they come together in a conference committee, and then they agree upon, which sometimes it turns out completely different than what either of the bills have really went in. And then they vote on it. The House, Senate vote on it again, and then it gets on law. Another time, which this is pretty common now, is the House makes its own bill, and Senate edits it, and the House just agrees back to the Senate amendment or amendments on the bill. So those are the ways that normally things get passed now. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get things passed because of the stupid Senate filibuster, which is very annoying, and it needs to go because, or needs to at least change back to what it was in the 70s, where someone had to stand up and talk for hours on end to the point where exhaustion or collapsing, or to the point where they had to poo or pee on live TV. It needs to either go back to that. It really needs to go back to that. There needs to be consequences for it. You can't just secretly filibuster something and nobody know. That shouldn't be able to be done. If you really support or dislike a bill that much, you need to be able to be willing to be standing up on television and tell everybody not why you don't like it, and not risk you and not just say, oh, I don't really care if I'm not going to risk my seat because this corporation told me that I should filibuster this. Yeah, that shouldn't be. Anyways, there's 9 members also. So the president is elected by the Electoral College. Also, all revenue bills in the House of Representatives. That's another thing. That comes from the House. That comes from the British system. A lot of things in the U.S. come from the British system. We like to pretend it's from Greece or Rome, but really, not Greece and Rome, nothing like it. For the president, okay, so the powers of the president are actually kind of, I don't know. But the president appoints Supreme Court justices, which the Senate confirms. Do 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 do. Do and do. And also they sign treaties with other countries, which the Senate has to ratify. They also appoint cabinet, appoint the armed forces, they appoint the executive office. Also, Senate has to ratify cabinet and the armed forces as well. The president also has the power to dismiss any of them at any time, except the Supreme Court, because of course there's a branch that would undermine the separation of powers pretty big way. That's in a pretty big way that would undermine it. The president also has the power to veto things. We discussed earlier. Also, the Congress can override it with 2/3 of both houses, which is very rare. But it did happen that Trump, the defense bill that was passed, was controversial, mainly because COVID attached to it, and then the COVID legislation was attached to it, and which I think he was right for not vetoing it, to be personally, but it overrided it. Personally, I actually thought it's one of the things I agreed with Trump on, actually, is the veto of that bill, or veto of it, because it stunk because of all the other things that were attached, all the riders that were attached to it, and actual Section 230, which I was surprised he was against the thing, because that actually doesn't help him. But anyways, surprisingly. So people over the age of 18, until recently at least, and people over the age of 18 elect the Electoral College. The Electoral College elects the president. The Electoral College is really a rubber stamp body for the people, which is a good thing because we really want a democracy, not a Well, this Electoral College works like this. So whenever you elect a candidate, you also are electing an elector that goes with them. So an elector will be for district or for their area, which there are 538 electors for the 435 members of Congress, plus the 100 members of the Senate, plus 3 for DC because it's not represented in the House or the Senate. And they, I think, no, it's 538. Yep, okay. So they vote on each one individually in their own state, and they've pretty much always approved what was done with the popular vote. The only thing is that every state gets 2 for their 2 senators, plus their number of House representatives. Also, the other thing is that whoever earns the vote, the majority of the popular vote in that state earns all their electors, even when they didn't earn that percentage. They didn't earn 100% of the popular vote. So, for example, Trump won about 51% of Florida. He got all of Florida's votes. Similarly, Biden won about 51%, maybe 52, something close. It was close. Won something like that of Pennsylvania, but still by close, I mean over several thousand votes. It wasn't like 20,000 wouldn't have made a difference. I remember that from a thing that we were doing, that about 20,000 ballots that they were reviewing in Philadelphia, and I was on a call to call people up and say, hey, did check into people saying, hey, did you know there were ballots being reviewed? And you might want to contact the election office and say that you've been there, that you actually are a real person and exist, and it's 20,000 people, I think, something like that, 15,000, somewhere in that ballpark range. And they said that really wouldn't affect the outcome of the election. By that point, I think it was already called for BA. I don't remember exactly. Might have been a week, I think, for the actual election. It might have not been actually called, but I think that we're getting close to saying that Biden. I don't think they were done counting, but I think they were already over the Biden thing. But even if it changed, yeah. Anyways, so there's 538 members. I don't remember the details of that. Needless to say, with my social anxiety, I ended that call early. Over enthusiasm for that. But social anxiety said no. Anyways, so so the Electoral College is pretty much not really that important of a body anymore. The only thing is kind of annoying because, well, it doesn't actually represent the vote of the people, mainly because of that 100% of the vote, even though you didn't win 100% of the vote type thing. You won the majority, but now you get 100% of the electoral votes in that state, which isn't really how it's supposed to work, but yet this is how it is, which is annoying. So, yeah, they elect that. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah. And also there's the cabinet. Yeah, we're getting off. So there's that. The president also has the power to direct the armed forces as commander-in-chief. The president also has the power as chief legislator to propose things, technically. The president also has the power of veto, which can be used as a veto threat to try to get Congress to do things. They also have the power to give a speech every year or give reports to Congress, State of the Union, address, that type of thing. The president also has the power to convene Congress or adjourn Congress when Congress can't agree, which is those are also powers from the monarch, who could just dissolve a Congress or a parliament or convene a parliament. Now, the president can't dissolve Congress. What they can do is adjourn Congress, because the founding fathers didn't want them to do what King George III did to their legislatures. The veto also is a monarchical thing, because in the UK they have a absolute veto on monarch has an absolute veto, but they never use it because, Well, if she did use it, well, they would get pretty angry. And in fact, the last time it was used in the British Isles was 1716 or something like that, over a Scottish militia bill by Queen Anne. Anyways, so yeah, they don't use that anymore. King George III thought he might use it. He didn't get to, because advisor told him, do not do it. But he did for the US. In fact, it's the first 3 complaints in the Declaration of Independence, and then they put it in the US Constitution. I'm like, why? Why? Just why? Anyways, so back to that. So also the president has powers called executive orders, which are very important. They never talked about. What is an executive order anyways? An executive order is like a thing that says, basically it tells them how to force a law. And basically they can use one to declare a state of emergency. And basically like governors use them, like a national disaster declare a state of emergency. COVID, that was an executive order. An executive order, another with these vaccine things with vaccine mandates. Oh, you might be able to do one by executive order, but I would argue that you can't. And I would argue that they would violate someone's rights to do it. Right to violate the right to dignity. Anyways, so not that I'm not vaccinated, because I am vaccinated, and I recommend you go get vaccinated as well. Please go get vaccinated. Anyways, but just to go to someone's house and take them out of their house and then take them to the hospital and say jab them over the vaccine is kind of unethical. That's what I'm arguing. No, I'm saying that they can say dismiss, fire you from the job for it, but I'm saying also the government should require you to get vaccinated. They can put punishments on people that don't get vaccinated, but they ultimately have to have the choice to say, no, I'm not doing it. They can deal with the consequences for doing it. I forget. What was I going to say? I was trying to think of another example. Trump's tariffs are an example. His tariffs are an example. Biden recently signed 2 executive orders on trying to end these big monopoly corporations. Those are executive orders. I don't remember what else, but those are executive orders. Also, Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves, that's an executive order. An executive order is something that just basically tells how to enforce a law. Sometimes they're used in ways that's border on actually making up laws, but what they do is they technically are there to enforce the law. They basically say, take a primary piece of legislation that Congress has passed, and they say it should be enforced in this way. So let's say the National Emergencies Act, which so if there's that's what the first state of emergency, that's where that gets that from. There's also the Defense Production Act, which basically empowers the president to basically tell an industry, you need to produce this because we need this for war or pandemic or whatever. So that helps them organize production of things in emergencies. That's another emergency power the president has through executive order. These are executive orders. Yeah, so that's the important power, but the president cannot veto or remove a law by executive order because it's the president that would require Congress. They cannot like stop entirely really that. Also, the Supreme Court. And also they have cabinet. Cabinet is an organization which advises the president, and it also advises the president, and it advises the president, and its departments within it enforce the law. And it's also where a lot of the line of precedence in the U.S. goes. If the president dies, the vice president becomes president. If the vice president dies, the Speaker of the House, which is Nancy Pelosi. After that, if the Nancy Pelosi dies, Patrick Leahy, which is president pro tempore of the Senate, who's, yeah. And after him, falls down to probably the Secretary of State, which is Anthony Blinken. A Secretary of State handles foreign affairs. And there's the Secretary of the Treasury, which handles economic policy, revenue policy, monetary policy, that type of thing. The Secretary of Defense, which handles war. The Attorney General, which handles law enforcement, that type of thing. We also, states have their own attorney generals, which are separately elected. In the state of Pennsylvania, ours is last name Shapiro, and it's not Ben Shapiro. Thank God. It is, I forget, but it's the last name Shapiro. I remember that much, and I know it's not Ben Shapiro. I have to think about the time it says, "Do you think they're not just gonna move? Move to where? Move to where, Ben? Or out in the who, Ben? Aquaman?" And the Secretary of Interior, which is a miscellaneous department. It really handles environment, foreign affairs, Native American lands, national parks, etc. Currently done by Deb Haaland, which is the first Native American Secretary of the Interior, which is very good since it's the one that runs Native American policy. This is kind of unfortunate. This take it up until now to get that. The Secretary of Agriculture, who's currently Tom Visliak, they've run a pretty big department that deals with agricultural stuff. The USDA is what it's referred to. So FBI is also under the Attorney General, by the way. So Tom Visliak is currently, which annoys me, but apparently they're doing well with this time. But Tom Visliak he's like the anti-hero here because Biden just appointed him because he was Obama's administrator, and at one point he came to Obama and said, "I want to resign because I can't find enough to do." And if I was president at the time, I'd say, if you can't find enough to do, you need to go take a tour of the country and find something to do, because in the entire sector of agriculture, where we have farmers that are shooting themselves because they having problems, mainly because of you should be able to find something to do. If you can't find something to do, there's a bigger problem. He's been better this time around because they changed policy. It's the same guy though. Secretary of Commerce, which runs NOAA for some reason, the National Standards Institute, which has a silver meter, literally a meter stick with silver. They also run the They also run the U.S. Census Bureau. It's more the miscellaneous department, really. They also have the Economic Development Administration, which gives out grants to communities to help them develop economically. They also run the Bureau of Industry and Security, the Exports and Imports Administration. They run like the tariffs and stuff. They also have the Secretary of Labor, which handles OSHA, because OSHA? What OSHA? So they handled labor standards and stuff like that. Make sure businesses are trying to, do that. They have the Health and Human Services, which runs the CDC. They run Medicare, Medicaid. They run those type of things. They've handled public health, of course, and health-related things. The Surgeon General is also under that, leading official in that department. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, which runs like Section 8 housing, grants, stuff. I think it runs under Section 8 housing. I'm not sure much about the department because it's changed. And I think they offloaded a bunch of the responsibilities to independent agencies just to make the U.S. government more complicated, because it wasn't already, its bureaucratic structure wasn't complicated enough, apparently. But anyways, we also have the Department of Transportation, which runs a bunch of things like funds highway building. It funds it does there's a lot of things that runs the FFA, FAA, which like air traffic control and making sure safety standards on airplanes, stuff like that. The Secretary of Energy, which runs basically the U.S. energy policy. So they run like the research in the energy area. They run grants and services for energy, that type of thing. We have the Secretary of Education, which a lot of people were saying about Betsy DeVos and how angry they were. But really, they need to stop being so angry at Betsy DeVos because the Secretary of Education of the federal government does very little except for for my federal aid, which concerns me very much so, because then I can't go to college. But because college is ridiculously expensive, like $20,000 a year, which is annoying. But so the Secretary of Education is currently Miguel Cardona, which I didn't know much about. I don't know much about him, but they do have very little impact on national education stuff. A lot of it was things of George Bush's every child's or every what was his No Child Left Behind Act, which is more like the every other child left behind act. And yeah, made standardized testing because yay, let's do standardized testing because that worked for everybody else, didn't it? No. What the system says, we're going to test more that way, you know, tests education is about testing. I guess we're going with the British philosophy that it's more like education is not for educating, it's for determining who's an idiot and who's a genius. Something like that was literally said about the guiding principles of the U.S. education or the British education system. With U.S. is different, but it's also like it's more like it's determining who the rich is and who the idiots are. Because of course we're going to assume that the rich are intelligent when they're not always intelligent, or the poor are stupid when they're not always stupid. Because yeah, and we're going to run our education system off of local tax dollars, the property taxes instead of polling it at least at state level. So it's very decentralized, and a lot of education policy is actually run. Most of it is run at state level. So this is not actually as important a position as people make it out to be. Also the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, which runs VA hospital and stuff. The Department of Homeland Security, which does U.S. Border Patrol, ICE, immigrations and customs. It runs the Coast Guard, runs the Secret Service, Department of Environmental Protection Agency. Currently, Michael S. Regan. So yeah, this is another cabinet position. Protect the environment. Office of Budget Management. They propose the budget. Some of the thing the president does, but rarely does the president actually get their budget signed into law as they ask. That doesn't pretty much never happens. The Director of National Intelligence, which runs like the network of intelligence agencies, including NSA and CIA and other organizations, or the DIA, and trade representative, which negotiates trade agreements, basically. The ambassador to the United Nations, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Small Business Administration, which I usually like to mock it as the small and medium and large size business administration because it doesn't actually just give the small businesses. The Offices of Science and Technology Policy, and the Chief of Staff. The Chief of Staff is a very important position that runs pretty much the entire bureaucracy. They pretty much do a lot of what the president, they pretty much actually run things. And go back to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is a 9-member court, which is members are appointed by the president and ratified by the Senate or conferred by the Senate, and they serve for life terms. And there's 9 members of them, and they overturn laws. A lot of people say that's like partisan. Remember, the Supreme Court's a scholarly body, and they're not just dismissed. Can't just be dismissed. So they do have and they're also all lawyers and judges. So when people say, "Oh, yeah, that's going to rule in the decision," not necessarily. The court currently is a very conservative court, 6-3 conservative majority, but yet it held up the ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. It held that up as being legal. It didn't hold up the individual mandate that was done years ago. They overturned that years ago, which it isn't technically, but to be honest, it isn't. The individual mandate wasn't legal. But they do time the sun. They're gonna if the law may have a gap in it, and that's when it's gonna go conservative. But usually, in this case, in our court currently, but usually and also that's the number is set by law. This Constitution is very little about Supreme Court. The only problem is it's a partisan institution. Whereas most countries' Supreme Court, most states actually, are appointed by a separate commission that's nonpartisan. But in this case, that's not how it works. So unfortunately, we have that problem. But the Supreme Court can overturn laws, which is a good thing, called judicial review. And it can overturn them when it finds them unconstitutional. Unfortunately, it takes that a little bit too far sometimes, and it's partisan leaning, it's problematic. It's like Citizens United versus the US, that's really problematic, for example. And it often makes wrong decisions before it makes right ones. Also, it's kind of iffy because I don't even think the judicial review is mentioned in the Constitution, because John Marshall gave the power to himself, which is kind of iffy in itself. You shouldn't have a branch be able to give itself power. It sort of violates the separation of powers itself. So there's that. So, yeah, welcome to my running critique on the US government. And yeah, I'm pretty much sure that's done with everything, which is pretty good because I think I might have gone over time. Okay, thanks for letting me rabble on about US government. See you next time. Bye. How do I get out of here?